New York University's Stern School of Business had seen its fair share of intellectual debates, but none had ever caused as much buzz as the one about to unfold. In the heart of Manhattan, inside one of NYU's grand lecture halls, a self-proclaimed intellectual titan, Professor Daniel Harrington, was preparing for what he thought would be a routine intellectual takedown. Harrington, a staunch liberal and a fierce critic of the Trump family, had spent years building a reputation as a no-nonsense professor who prided himself on dismantling conservative myths. He had a knack for challenging right-leaning students, often embarrassing them in front of packed classrooms. To him, conservatism was synonymous with ignorance, and he enjoyed proving it. So when the news broke that Barron Trump, the youngest son of the sitting U.S. president, had been invited to NYU as a guest speaker, Harrington saw an opportunity he couldn't resist. The media often overlooked Barron, assuming he was just another privileged child riding on his father's coattails. But Harrington wanted to make a point: intelligence wasn't inherited. In front of a packed auditorium of students and faculty, Harrington made his move. If the young Mr. Trump believes he's as brilliant as his father and his father's followers claim, he said, smirking as he adjusted his glasses, then surely he wouldn't mind an open challenge, a real test of intellect. Let's see if he can match wits with me in an IQ showdown. The room buzzed with murmurs. Some students chuckled, others nodded in agreement. NYU was known for being a liberal stronghold, and many saw this as an opportunity to expose what they believed to be the intellectual weakness of the Trump family. Barron, who had just stepped onto the stage, smiled politely. Dressed in a tailored suit, standing tall at 6 feet 7 inches, the young man exuded a quiet confidence that caught many by surprise. He didn't flinch at the challenge. Instead, he leaned forward, his piercing blue eyes locked onto the professor's. An IQ test? Barron repeated, his voice calm but firm. Is that what you want? Harrington folded his arms, the smirk still on his face. Unless you're afraid, he taunted. The crowd erupted into laughter. This was exactly the kind of spectacle they had hoped for. But Barron didn't flinch. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and casually typed something before looking back at Harrington. All right, Professor, he said. Let's make it interesting. If I lose, I'll publicly admit that you're the superior intellect. But if I win, you'll do the same for me. Deal? Harrington hesitated for a brief moment, but his arrogance wouldn't let him back down. Deal. What Harrington didn't know, however, was that he had just walked into the most humiliating moment of his career. News of the IQ challenge spread like wildfire. Within an hour, the auditorium was packed to capacity with students, faculty, and even members of the press eager to witness the intellectual showdown between Professor Daniel Harrington and Barron Trump. The stage was set and both men took their positions at the center. The test would consist of 3 rounds: logical reasoning and pattern recognition, mathematical problem-solving, general knowledge and critical thinking. A panel of impartial faculty members, including NYU's top psychologists and statisticians, was assembled to ensure fairness. The IQ test format was based on the Mensa standard, known for its rigor. As the first round began, the audience sat in hushed anticipation. A large screen displayed a series of intricate pattern recognition puzzles, testing one's ability to identify sequences, spatial reasoning, and abstract thinking. Each question had a time limit of 30 seconds. Harrington, confident in his experience, smirked as he clicked through the first few questions with ease. He had trained his mind for years with puzzles like these. But as he glanced at Barron, his smirk faded. The young Trump was breezing through the questions, barely hesitating before selecting his answers. 5 minutes in, the results for round 1 appeared on the screen. Barron Trump, 19/20 correct. Professor Harrington, 15/20 correct. The audience gasped. The conservative kid was ahead. Harrington scoffed, rubbing his chin. Beginner's luck, he muttered. But Barron wasn't fazed. He simply looked at the professor and said, ready for round 2? If Harrington had any area of undisputed expertise, it was mathematics. With a PhD in applied statistics and years of experience, he had spent decades teaching students how to navigate complex equations. This round would be mine, he thought. A new set of problems appeared: algebra, calculus, probability, and logic-based math puzzles. Harrington attacked them with fervor, quickly solving quadratic equations and probability distributions. His confidence grew with every correct answer. But once again, he glanced over at Barron, this time panic creeping in. The young man was solving the problems faster than he was. Barron had been raised in a world of high finance, real estate, and cutting-edge technology. From an early age, he had been exposed to algorithmic trading, machine learning applications, and economic modeling. He had trained his mind not just in theory but in real-world problem-solving. When the results flashed, Barron Trump, 1720 correct. Professor Harrington, 16/20 correct. A heavy silence fell over the room. The professor, the supposed intellectual powerhouse, was losing. His face turned red. "This test is ridiculous," he snapped. "IQ isn't about speed, it's about depth of thought." Barron simply chuckled. "I thought intelligence was about results, Professor." The audience murmured in amusement. Harrington had spent years preaching about objective reasoning, yet here he was, making excuses. One final round remained and his entire reputation was on the line. By now, the energy in the auditorium had shifted. What had started as an opportunity to embarrass a Trump had turned into an unexpected intellectual battle, one that Barron Trump was winning. Harrington, visibly rattled, adjusted his tie and took a deep breath. He needed to win this final round. Round 3, General Knowledge and Critical Thinking. This section would test historical awareness, geopolitical understanding, philosophy, and abstract reasoning. A mixture of multiple choice and open-ended questions would determine the victor. The questions began appearing on the screen. Question 1. Who was the first U.S. president to be impeached? Harrington confidently tapped his screen. Barron, calm as ever, did the same. Both got it right? Question 2. Explain the economic implications of the 2008 financial crisis on global markets. Harrington smirked, finally a chance to shine. He had written multiple academic papers on this very topic. As he scribbled his response, he noticed something unsettling. Barron wasn't writing paragraphs, he was using equations. What Harrington failed to realize was that Barron wasn't just repeating textbook knowledge, he was analyzing economic models in real time. He wasn't regurgitating facts, he was solving problems. When the panel of judges reviewed both answers, Barron's response was ranked higher for precision and insight. The professor's face darkened. The questions continued, testing philosophy, logic, and global events. Time and again, Barron outperformed him. Finally, the last question appeared on the screen. If you could change one foundational principle in modern economics, what would it be and why? Harrington cracked his knuckles and dove in, crafting an eloquent, politically charged response about income inequality and wealth distribution. He used all the right academic buzzwords, expecting a standing ovation. Then, Barron spoke. If I could change one foundational principle in modern economics, Barron said, I would replace the assumption that governments are efficient economic actors. Too many economic models assume bureaucracies act rationally, but history has shown that central planning almost always leads to misallocation of resources. The market, when left free, corrects inefficiencies far better than any government ever could. The room fell silent. Even some of the left-leaning students nodded in agreement. The judges submitted their final scores. Barron Trump, 18/20. Professor Harrington, 14/20. It was over. The once unshakable Professor Harrington had been decisively defeated by the very person he had set out to humiliate. A stunned hush settled over the audience. The liberal professor who had spent years belittling conservative students had just been intellectually outclassed by the youngest Trump. The auditorium was silent, save for the quiet murmuring of students who could hardly believe what they had just witnessed. Barron Trump had won. Decisively. Professor Daniel Harrington, once the dominant intellectual force at NYU Stern, had been dismantled on his own turf. The realization set in quickly, and a deep flush of embarrassment spread across his face. He had been so sure, so arrogantly certain that Barron was nothing more than a rich kid who had been spoon-fed his entire life. But now, staring at the final results on the screen, he realized his mistake. Barron hadn't just beaten him, he had exposed him. The panel of judges looked at each other awkwardly, unsure of how to proceed. One of them finally cleared his throat and announced the results. With a final score of 54-45, Barron Trump is the winner of this challenge. The auditorium erupted, not in boos, not in jeers, but in applause. Even students who had come expecting to cheer for Harrington were clapping. It was impossible to deny what had happened. Barron hadn't won because of his name, he had won because he was simply smarter. Harrington, still standing at the podium, clenched his fists. He had agreed to the terms of the challenge. And now he had to admit defeat. He swallowed his pride and turned to Barron, forcing himself to speak. I must admit, Harrington began, that I underestimated you. I expected you to crumble under pressure, but he sighed heavily, you beat me fair and square. Barron nodded respectfully. Thank you, Professor. Harrington hesitated, looking out at the students watching him, waiting. This was supposed to be his moment of triumph. Instead, he had become the lesson. His voice was barely above a whisper when he spoke again. Barron Trump is the superior intellect. A gasp rippled through the room. And then? Cheers. Not everyone was happy, of course. Some students stormed out, furious that their beloved professor had been bested. But others, many others, had just witnessed something they never expected. A student in the front row wearing a Bernie Sanders t-shirt muttered, "Damn, maybe we were wrong about this guy." Meanwhile, Barron simply smiled. He hadn't come to humiliate anyone. He had just come to prove a point that intelligence isn't dictated by political affiliation. And he had done just that. But the real humiliation for Professor Harrington was yet to come. The video of the debate spread across social media within hours. At first, only NYU students shared it, but soon, conservative commentators, news networks, and influencers picked it up. The headline practically wrote itself. Liberal professor challenges Barron Trump to an IQ test, gets destroyed. The footage showed everything: Harrington's smug confidence in the beginning, his growing frustration as Barron outperformed him, and finally, his reluctant admission of defeat. The response was immediate and brutal. Media explosion. Fox News ran a segment titled "NYU Professor Exposed: The Moment an Intellectual Crumbled." Tucker Carlson, grinning ear to ear, played the clip on repeat. For years, these so-called academics have told us they're the smartest people in the room. Well, what happens when an actual smart person shows up? Meanwhile, on MSNBC, Rachel Maddow tried to downplay the event. This was an unfair setup. A single test doesn't prove intelligence. But even some of her usual viewers weren't buying it. Online, conservatives celebrated Barron's victory. Memes flooded Twitter. A photoshopped image of Barron standing over Harrington like a chess grandmaster. A clip of Harrington saying Barron Trump is the superior intellect played on loop. The phrase "owned by a Trump" trending nationwide. The university panicked. Stern School of Business issued a statement saying, "We support intellectual discourse and remain proud of our faculty." But internally, they were furious. Professor Harrington was called into an emergency meeting with the university board. He sat across from the dean, his face still red from the humiliation. "This is a disaster," the dean hissed. "You were supposed to expose him, not become a laughingstock." Harrington could only sit there, seething. He had spent years building his reputation as the progressive professor who could crush conservatives in debates. Yeah? He was a meme. Barron Trump speaks. Amid all the chaos, Barron remained calm. In an interview, he was asked how he felt about beating one of NYU's top professors. His response? "I wasn't trying to embarrass him. I just wanted to prove that intelligence isn't about ideology, it's about truth." The answer was simple, yet devastating. He didn't have to gloat because the world already knew he had won. The final blow. Days later, Professor Harrington announced his resignation. His statement read, "After much reflection, I have decided to step away from my teaching role. I remain committed to academic inquiry, but it is clear that my presence at NYU has become a distraction." Translation? He was done. Barron Trump had walked into NYU as a guest speaker. He walked out having ended a professor's career. And all he had to do was be smarter.